Hi, welcome to the Early Music Newcastle podcast series. I'm Dr. Larry Zazzo, Senior Lecturer and Head of Performance at Newcastle University. In addition to my musicological work focusing on Handel's vocal music, I'm a working countertenor, very much still in the business, as it were, and performing on stages across the world with a concentration on Baroque opera. I'm currently at the Badisches Staatstheater Karlsruhe in southwest Germany, about a half an hour from the famous spa town of Baden-Baden and the home of the famous yearly International Handel Festival. I'm appearing as the famed knight Rinaldo in Handel's eponymous opera from 1711, but here in an interesting, very rarely performed later version that Handel offered to London audiences 20 years later in 1731. I battle the sorceress Armida and the Saracen forces led by Argante and try to regain the captured Princess Almirena as well as the city of Jerusalem. There are wonderful opportunities for scenic effects, including a dragon, and so it presents opportunities but also challenges for a director, a set designer, and a costume designer. Today, we're very lucky to have with us all three in one: the director, set designer, and costume designer for this new production of Rinaldo, premiering on Friday, the 21st of February here in Karlsruhe. Hinrich Horstkotte is one of those rare individuals working in the opera business today, a true Renaissance man.
Thank you very much indeed.
Hinrich was born in Berlin and actually started out as a marionette player, yet another skill, yet another feather in his cap, before studying set and costume design at the Academy of Fine Arts in Munich with Karl Ernst and Ursel Herrmann. He joined them as their preferred assistant director for productions in Amsterdam, Geneva, Baden-Baden, Innsbruck, and at the Salzburg Festival. He was awarded the debut award, Debutantenpreis of the Bavarian state government, along with his degree in 1988.
It's true.
And since 94, he's been designing sets and costumes for the Biennale Munich, the Ludwigsburger Schlossfestspiele, among others, opera houses in Chemnitz, Nuremberg, Augsburg, Berlin, Bremerhaven, Chemnitz, Dessau, Detmold, Dortmund, Freiburg, Halberstadt, Hamburg, Krefeld, München, Gladbach, Oldenburg, Radebeul, Saarbrücken, etc. Denmark, Bayreuth, Innsbruck. He has more than 70 productions in opera.
It's 90.
It's 90.
Right now it's 90.
It's over 90 in opera, operetta, drama, and puppet theater, ranging from Shakespeare to Cavalli to Purcell to Verdi to Prokofiev to Britten, all of which I think I can see in your productions, even in this Rinaldo, but we'll talk about that in a second.
You did your research. Thank you very much indeed.
He's taught stagecraft for opera singers at the University of the Arts and at the Technical University in Berlin and at the International Opera Studio at the Staatsoper unter den Linden, Berlin. Hinrich, finally, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
After that long but necessary introduction of your many credits.
Just one little correction. Unfortunately, I was not born in Berlin. I was born, to my own embarrassment, in Bonn, but I learned to speak in Berlin.
Born in Bonn, raised in Berlin. Thank you for that correction. I think both Bonnites and Berliners would be offended.
Very much.
Either way. Thanks for clarifying. So Hinrich, of course, it's clear that even the modern concept of a stage director, much less a dramaturg, which I talked about with Konrad in another podcast at Frankfurt. A stage director didn't really exist in Handel's time. We do know from a 17th century anonymous source that there was someone called Il Corrago, who did fill some of the roles of a stage director or kind of a chorus master, but it was perhaps a more basic one that perhaps included prompting and negotiating of entrances and exits, and might have been taken by either a choreographer, the dancing master, or in Handel's case, very possibly the chief poet or librettist of the Royal Academy.
Or the director of the theater.
Or the director of the theater, perhaps Nicola Haim. We have here Giacomo Rossi, perhaps maybe Paolo Rolli, who adapted the libretto. In another podcast, which listeners can hear on the series, as I said, during a production of Rodelinda in Frankfurt, I spoke with a dramaturg there, Konrad Kuhn, and we talked about what a dramaturg is. Of course, that was a Klaus Guth production, and he is a celebrated stage director, and very much, I suppose, in the tradition of Deutsche Bühnenregietheater.
I would say so, yeah.
Influenced by it. And this is a mode of to be very brief, of kind of updating or modernizing or otherwise changing the drama, sometimes even the musical text. And this style of staging opera has its roots in post-war revivals of Wagner, I would say.
I would say so, and plus very much in directing drama and the evolution of drama. Yes, very much.
So it comes very much out of theater.
Very much indeed.
Spoken theater, as it were. It's often this style of directing. It's often, and this is a early music podcast.
Yes.
This style of reviving opera is by many people reviled in the UK and the US and perhaps elsewhere, particularly by Handel scholars or purists who insist that Baroque opera, in keeping with the historically informed nature of musical performance, of course, we were playing with period instruments, with historically informed techniques, at historical pitch, that the staging, the visual elements should also be performed in a manner that Handel himself might have recognized. And it's only in this way that we can fully appreciate his dramatic genius. So you're going to comment in a second. So hold your tongue for a second. So that was a rather long lead into my question. So having rehearsed with you for the past month or 6 weeks and been on your set and in your costumes, your fabulous costumes and set, and your very well thought through production, I would say you fall in neither of these, neither the Regie Theater nor the purist kind of museum camp, for sure. But you do obviously are very influenced by historical elements. And I'm wondering if you could take us through your artistic process in general and on this production specifically. Do you have a methodology or a set of principles or a manifesto perhaps in your dramaturgy? And in what way are you influenced by historical performance practices, and how important do you think they might be for modern audiences?
Well, first of all, to begin with, as you already mentioned, there must be a reason for the revival of Baroque opera these days, or let's say within the last 30 years or something. And one of the reasons is obviously that there is a certain attraction in I would call it the amount of possibility of improvisation in the music, or in the fact, and that's very tempting for a director especially, is the fact that it's a relatively open form. That is, the composer is offering something to interpret for interpretation, but the singer, the actor, the composer, the musician has much more. I wouldn't necessarily say liberties, but he has much more options to cope with everything that's written down. To begin with, of course, in the da capo aria form, that you have you are asked to invent some ornaments, to work as a creative musician with everything. And this concerns, for my taste, not only the music, but also the staging. Which brings us to the point that in the beginning, speaking about a technique, if there is such a thing for a director, I don't believe,
or methodology.
A methodology, exactly, is at first, to begin with, from which starting point would the composer begin his work? That is, why did he choose a certain subject? Why was he offered a certain subject? What was the expectation? What were the expectation of the audience, of the people who wanted to see it? Very clearly, in our case, it was done for a mixed audience, which is very, very important. So it was different from many Italian composers by that time who would just have noble people, who would be aware of different languages, who would be aware of any kind of allegories, ancient gods, stories. In this case, it was done for an audience that wanted to be entertained, necessarily wanted to be entertained, maybe with a different background in terms of knowledge about mythology, whatever. So we know about the first performance of Rinaldo, for instance, that the 1711 one, that he was criticized afterwards in coping too much with stage effects. As you know, there has this Almirena aria where, as they say, have been then almost 5,000 living birds on stage. I wonder.
We talk about some of which escaped, and we're twittering away for the rest of the
Absolutely. Opera. So you wonder, even being in the same room with 5,000 words. That must have been quite challenging for a musician, at least, and all the other effects that we had. So that, and going back to your introduction, speaking about the director, obviously there was somebody thinking about what to offer the audience in terms of visual effects and costumes and sets and all this. So there were great expectations, and some people would have thought that was a little much in this particular case. Maybe from our point of view, also concerning the quality of the music, which is of a super high range, and of course we don't want to distract them from what is performed in the music, and also what is performed within the characters concerning the story and all this. Nevertheless, there are certain scenes in this opera that require certain scenical effects, such as the entrance of Armida, for instance. There are several moments where we have little symphonies, as Handel calls them, which are clearly music for something spectacular happening. You were mentioning already that there is supposed to be a dragon. It's set in the text, and it's not just set in the text, but it's also set in music. Dum, 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 so we can hear something, which is there. There's fire. There's different effects. There's birds, as I said. There's water. There's a singing spirit. We don't know exactly who she is. Yeah. There's a siren, kind of a siren, exactly, and all this. So this requires something visual to happen, even though now you could start to think of what does it mean? What's the reason for the existence of the siren? And here is where my work begins. How can we cope with these relatively simple images for an audience of today, which doesn't necessarily have to be more educated than an audience in Handel's times, but is educated in a different way, has different expectations for spectacular things going on stage. As we know, nowadays, everybody's aware of the possibilities of the cinema.
Yeah, the cinema has changed the
game. Exactly. And it has changed the game that way very much, that it brought it away from the... how can I say this? The audience has to work as well. That's the important thing. And I would say when we go to the opera, the audience has to agree to the fact that we don't speak, we sing. We don't scream, we sing. We have different, in your case especially, the audience has to be aware of the fact that the hero in this opera has relatively high voice. That used to be a castrato, but now we could spend an hour talking about
it. In English, we would say it's a suspension of disbelief. There's a contract with the audience that
absolutely
you're accepting some ridiculous things that are happening
absolutely
for the sake of the action.
Very much. And this suspension of disbelief contains as well everything that's going on visually. That is, that you have to believe that the painted fire is a real fire, that the painted forest is a real forest, that the quick scene changes must be surprising, but they contain some collaboration from the audience. And this is something which nowadays has changed. Because we go to the cinema, we see CGI moved dragons.
Realism, verisimilitude.
Absolutely. But then I would say, as you know much better than I do as a singer, the first question I always get by people who go to the opera for the first time, do they really sing without a microphone? And they say, yes, they do. And of course, it's something you have to get used to. Of course, you have to... In German, we would say, du musst die Ohren spitzen. That is, you have to listen carefully, maybe a little bit more carefully as if you would have headphones and get the full amount of sound.
There's something wonderfully raw about opera still.
Exactly.
After all of these centuries. It's why it still exists.
Exactly. And I very much believe in the pureness of the theatrical tools. I would even say, unfortunately, in this particular case, I'm forced, due to a relatively limited amount of money, which is not limited at all, but this is a very wide stage. And that means if I want to fill the stage with material, just with material, I have to spend a lot of money for walls and wood and paint and all this. And of course, there is a certain amount of limit for this. So I decided to add an extra level that is a kind of video, but I wanted to make sure that even the video doesn't look like just a film, because I believe, as I just said, it's too completely different things. To have a film where you somewhat how to say this, you turn the audience into a kind of empty room. You start in the dark, the sound is that loud that you're not listening to somebody else or something else. It's dark and you just see what's going on screen. You have the possibility of a zoom, for instance, so the film director can make you get closer or further away from any character. And this is something you, as a theater director or opera director, have to make the audience feel. Of course, they can always choose, do I want to watch Mr. Zazzo or do I want to watch the chorus, if there would be one, or I don't know, or I'm annoyed, or I want to watch the conductor. So you have to find a way how to guide them, to guide their looks and all this. So this is, if there is any, this is a little part of the technique of how to stage something as a director. And it's something different. It's something that has to do with the ability of the audience to believe something that is not real. And this is very true for Baroque opera, but maybe even more true than for later opera.
It's interesting you say that, and I don't know to what extent this is in your other productions, but of course, in this production, and maybe because of the opera itself, which is involving a sorceress, and part of the fable, the lesson that the opera is trying to tell the audience is, look at Rinaldo, and Rinaldo keeps saying, I'm trying to avoid error. I'm trying to avoid illusion. And I think in this production, there's very much a theatricality. People call it postmodern, which I hate because it's very old. It's very old. Pre-modern. It's certainly early modern. The Shakespearean sense of the world's a stage. Right?
Absolutely.
And we even have in this a breaking of the wand, which I just realized is very much Prospero.
Yeah, very much indeed. And by the same time, the wand in our case is the baton.
The baton. I have the breaking of the baton, which is this kind of magic wand that the Mago Cristiano, the Christian mage. We could have a whole conversation about that and Christianity and the political aspects, but we're not going to go there for this podcast. But of course, Armida is a sorceress, but in a way, she's a theater director.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Exactly.
And she's controlling these.
So basically, it's what I'm trying to bring into this production is that the illusion Armida performs is connected to the theater. And what happens in the very end, when she and her world and everything she does is destroyed, it's as well the destruction of the theater as well. Yesterday, I had, surprisingly, the singer who sings the Mago Cristiano told me after the rehearsal, because he saw for the first time what we did with Lascia che pianga, the most famous piece of music in this opera, where Almirena is just saying, let me weep because I'm in prison. And by the same time, we see in the background an image of a theater, like of an audience, of a Baroque theater audience, and it's melting down. And Lisandro, the singer, told me that he was incredibly moved because he said, isn't that the most sad thing you could possibly think of in the opera, that the opera is fading away, melting down? To be honest, I didn't think about that. But even though that specifically this image was the first image I had when I got the offer to do this.
Well, there's so many wonderful images, and to the extent of what's unconscious and what's not is really interesting. There's one scene where you have kind of almost the skin. We don't want to have too many spoilers, but there's a sense that the skin is kind of slowly peeling off different structures, human and non-human. That all of these accoutrements of theater that help to sustain this illusion, that immerse the audience, are going away. And all we have are these players at the end who come out and say this message. I think also of Don Quixote, again,
very much
not modern, but we talked about Don Quixote.
We talked about Don Quixote, which basically was a parody of this kind of story, such as Gerusalemme Liberata.
A character who is too immersed in fiction, immersed in Tasso and Ariosto.
Exactly. And this is what we are trying to do with your character, with a Rinaldo character. We want to tell how somebody can survive who who is ripped of the ability to believe something that might not be true, or who is not allowed to believe in illusions. Of whom illusions are taken away. Somebody who's constantly reminded of do what you've been told to do, be a soldier, forget about everything that might be sort of distracting. Plus, if you don't do so, you will not get the love of your life, which is in the end. And whether this, well, to speak for myself, like for many people who are working in the arts, of course, I would say that if there wouldn't be, if I wouldn't have had given the opportunity to work in the arts, you never know what would have happened with me. I wouldn't, for my personal, for me personally, I wouldn't necessarily say that I would end up in the madhouse, but you never know.
I think you would have made you could make an amazing therapist, Hinrich.
Well, I'm not so sure about that. Maybe now, because I'm working in the arts.
I think you need to be a therapist sometimes when working with crazy singers such as
But
myself.
I'm a therapist for myself as well.
Yeah.
To say something very personal is that the way our profession works, of course, is taken away a lot of private life from you just because of the amount of work you have to do and the amount of concentration you're putting on a certain subject. And it's a choice. It was my choice to choose this profession and to choose the life I'm leading. And the funny thing is that the older I get, the more I realize how compensating our work is for something that is lacking or that other people would not sacrifice for their profession. In terms of that, that we that's the wonderful thing about rehearsing, is that on the first day of rehearsals, you meet people whom you never met before, like the two of us, for instance. And on day one, we already and we started to talk about, maybe not even talk about, very, very intimate things and things that we were all opening our hearts, because it's about madness, it's about love, it's about sex. Sometimes it's about cruelty, horrible things, war, and all this. So many things that take ordinary people months or a lifetime to get close to each other happens to us every single day.
I mean, I can certainly say, as a performer and working with you, this experience, as I continue throughout my career, I find it deeply meaningful, not always in a way that I could readily articulate. So I suppose what I wanted to maybe get back to is the audience. So an 18th century audience, if the message, one of the message at least of the opera, is beware of illusion.
Kind of.
And in fact, and the medium through which this message is being delivered is illusion. Is the theater. Right? So in a sense, the message is undermined by the medium, or perhaps reinforced by the medium. So it is that same effect. Of course, this fourth wall never really existed. We have examples of opera singers, when they're not singing, chatting to people in the audience.
Absolutely.
Whether that's very professional or not, we don't know. But there was less of a sense of this fully immersive idea. Right? People were eating, people were drinking, people were chatting.
Then they would have funny intermezzi in the intermissions. Then if you go to the beautiful old Bayreuth Opera House, within the orchestra pit, there is a podest that was constructed just for the arias. So they would step down from stage, would stand in the middle of the orchestra for the arias. It still exists. I used it when I did something like that. That's wonderful. Really? Because, and especially for the arias that have an additional instrument where the singer is, like an oboe or something. So the singer would step out of the theatrical situation, step into the orchestra, sing a special aria, and then probably return. I couldn't agree more. That's true. The thing, what you said, the moral of the play, there is something special about the Baroque opera, or I would say in general about the 18th century opera, and the moral in the end of the play, which is a little different from the moral that would have been there, let's say, in Shakespeare's plays. Even though sometimes the moral isn't clearly pronounced in the end. If you take a Shakespearean play, in the end, it's very clear what he wants to teach us, and for good reason. Think of the Scottish play see where too much ambition can lead to, whatever, or see where, in Romeo and Juliet's case, see where it leads to. If
this is what it means to be a good ruler, and this is what it means to be a bad ruler.
There you
Here
are.
are the consequences.
In our case, and in most of the 18th century operas, until, let's say, the Mozart da Ponte operas, it's that way, that the characters speak out a moral in the end. And very often you have the impression, do they really believe this? Is this really the truth? It's obviously the moral of the story, as far as we can say. And we had a wonderful situation, for my taste, in our rehearsal time, because there is basically the final phrase in the opera is written in an old Italian, in a way that the Italians in our cast believe that it meant something completely different than I believe.
Even the opposite of what?
Exactly, basically the opposite. Yeah. Because what it says, just to give the listeners an example, it says, the one is happy who gives, and now comes a difficult Italian word, vano. Vano can mean vain,
empty, aimless,
but also can be how would you call it if you're constantly staring into the mirror? What's the English word? The narcissistic heart. Now, happy is just the one who gives his heart, that is this or that or that or that or that, a goal. The Italians were insisting, no. What it means is just that one is happy who is in love.
Yeah.
And then we even brought in...
and we thought, no, it's exactly the opposite. This is the consequence of love.
Exactly. And then we had so many different options. And in the end, we brought an Italian, what's the English word for it? The scientist, so to say, who said, no, we are right. The modern Italian...
The English people, or the English speakers...
were right.
With the non-native Italians were correct. And I actually brought out the 18th century word book.
Absolutely.
Which was translated into English. And there we had at least what an 18th century London audience would have understood.
Absolutely.
Because they would literally have been reading that translation.
Exactly. And then to round up that funny situation is that the two of us had the conversation because I was supposed to be part in the translation for the subtitles of our production. And in the German language, there is no word that includes all of these different colors. So we decided for the German translation just to write down only that person is happy who gives his heart a goal. So
whatever that goal,
whatever that goal might be, whatever heart he has. So here we are, very close to what I was trying to express. The moral of the thing is relatively open, and I have a clear question mark on top of it. Just to give you a little story, which probably we are going to print in the program, is I'm a great admirer of the French playwright, 18th century playwright Marivaux. And he wrote a lot of beautiful plays, all about the idea that any feeling can be examined in a kind of experiment. So it's basically all of his plays are about, let's say, a prince and a princess who discuss the subject of vanity. And they would say, are we born with vanity? And then they say, why don't we make an experiment? We have 2 babies, female babies, 2 male babies, make them grow up in a tower all by themselves. And on their 18th century birthday, we put them all together in different constellations and see what happens with them.
That sounds like a perverted così fan tutte.
It is exactly what così fan tutte is about. And all of his plays are that way. And then the little story I want to tell you is that he, this playwright, also had his own magazine where he was discussing philosophical questions. It was called Le Spectateur Français, so the French spectator, so to say. And in it, he discusses an incident where he was asked, "Why are you always so skeptic? Why is your view on people's feelings so cold?" And he says, "This is because something happened to me when I was a young man. I was in love with a woman who was very different from all women in my time. which was, as we know, the Rococo, the 18th century, was the time of the highest amount of codes, as I would call it. That is, for instance, you know that it's the English word, the beauty spot, the black spot, which you have in your
beauty mark.
Beauty mark. Where you would put your beauty mark could give the other one a certain information about your character, about your sexual preferences, about your state, whatever. Same for different colors, how you would wear a certain ribbon on your coat. And so he said, but I was in love with a girl who was completely free from all this kind of codes. She seemed to be completely natural. She was blushing when I was making her compliments. And I was so much in love with her because she was so natural. And one evening I had dinner with her and then I left. And on my way home, I discovered that I lost a glove in her place. So I returned, found the door open, entered her room, saw her standing in front of the mirror and practicing everything that I believed to be real.
In fact, she was pretending to be a noble savage.
Exactly.
She was an evil Cinderella.
Kind of. And then I would take my glove and she realized, shocked, that I witnessed what she just did. And I said, goodbye. And she said, why goodbye? And then I said, Madame, tonight I could see the machines in the opera.
And this is exactly what we see in Rinaldo.
And he says, now I can still enjoy them, but they don't touch me anymore.
Well, let's hope that audiences are touched by this. Thank you so much, Hinrich. Those of you the listeners, give your aimless heart a go and beg, borrow, or steal a ticket to Rinaldo. We open next Friday. I can't believe it's a week from today.
Yeah.
And there are 5 performances. It's almost sold out. It will come back again next year, but if anyone's interested, please come on out and come support us. It's going to be very exciting. I'm very excited. Hinrich, thank you so much for speaking with me and joining us on this podcast series. I think I can well toi. I wish you. And can I wish myself? Is that
I wish you in Bocca Lupo.
Bocca Lupo.
Crepi Lupo.
Thank you so much, Hinrich, and thank you all for tuning in. Bye.